It's 11 o'clock. Tracy, will you do roll call, please?
Scholl,
Here.
McIntyre,
Here.
DeCook.
Here. Okay, our only agenda item today is discussion of a proposal regarding, you're gonna hear me, regarding excavation and unfinished square footage in the Justice Center. To give sort of a historical recap, on bid day, one of the bid alternatives was to excavate and put shell space for 4,000 square feet. The bids came back. I think there was predominantly 3 vendors that that applied to. Bids came back in the amount of, I believe it was $150,000. It's in the area of 150, give or take 5. And so we accepted that as the bid alternative. After that, it was, pretty clear that picking up that sort of square footage was prudent, and so the board agreed to do it. But we also looked at the remaining part of the unfinished basement on the court side and sort of extrapolated that it would be at least worth our time to look at the remaining square footage to see if we could excavate that as well and do something similar so that the county, when and if the court side needs to expand, they would have an additional up to 4,000 square feet. Given the timeline of things, we did receive sort of a preliminary number in February, and what the board requested was more firmed up numbers so that we could make a determination on whether or not we would go forward with that. I will also be the first to admit that the current pandemic, as well as the just reality, especially with respect to the credit market, did not put the county in a position to really make prudent decisions on moving forward or not with the remaining 4,000 square feet of shell space, because in large part, the financing on the remaining $20.4 million of issuance of our bonds was not locked in until last Tuesday. I don't remember the date of that. Was that March 30th or something like that? I mean, it was 9 days ago, 10 days ago. So once we had the number locked in for financing, then we knew sort of our delta for funding ability, and at that point we pressed a little harder to see if we could get some more firm numbers. We now have more firm numbers. Who's on the phone today? Is Mike or Shive Hattery and DCI on?
Yes, they're both on.
Okay, so you all can hear me. I'd like both of you to sort of address what you found, and then I'll also tell the other 2 supervisors today that as part of the proposal, one of the concerns that was voiced in a public meeting and has certainly been voiced by the users, regardless of what we do today with the additional square footage down there, was that the 150 did not have a slab foundation. And so, there was some concerns that were voiced by the public and some people in the know that were concerned about potentially radon or moisture or dust. And so, at least from the user's perspective and from my own perspective, I thought it would be more appropriate to also look at what the cost of having a slab foundation or at least some sort of a texture or something down there to prevent that. So this proposal that's before us is for an additional 4,000 square feet of shell space. That also is inclusive of doing the concrete slab on the entirety of the basement. So the numbers that we're gonna be reviewing today are inclusive of 4,000 on both, or 4,000 on the original 4,000 having concrete, and potentially the new 4,000 having concrete as well. So that is baked into the numbers. So with that, We'll start with Shive today, because I think that our architect and the construction manager do have a difference in numbers. So I'd like to hear from both of them and have you take questions from the board if we have some, and then we can make a determination on what we do. One of the options is clearly to do nothing. One of the options is to move forward, or something in between. That's how I see it, and we'll start with Mr. Lewis.
It's not letting me unmute him. Mike, do you have a lock on, are you open? Are you there, Mike?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, there was something going on with muting, either on my end or yours, but it seems to be working. So good morning, everybody. So the proposal that was put together and issued several weeks back, Shive Hattery has reviewed the 3 contractor quotes that have come back with regard to the concrete work and dirt work and adjustments. The main question that we had to do with the security reinforcing, and would there need to be any additional security reinforcing that would happen? What is now a concrete poured wall would become a masonry wall in the proposal, and we have since the proposal have come back and reviewing their quotes and have been able to resolve that the security reinforcing has been addressed. And so the number that we come up with the 3 quotes is $183,562 for the quotes, and Nick, we want you to verify that we're correct in that. There are, just from a scoping perspective, this is for the shell space only, so there's no interior build out of the space. It's just to put basically the space back into the building with concrete slabs, as Aaron said, in both sides of the basement. So we did go ahead and address getting that concrete slab put in the alternate number 3, getting that put in by this proposal. There is not any fireproofing in the space, although to be candid, none is required. The mechanical electrical work would be the one thing that we see still needed to be put in if you accept this. We didn't put it into this proposal at this time because we weren't sure if you were going to ask us to build out the space or not. And if the space remains a shell space, we would just put in the fire sprinkler system in there and minimal electrical lights, just so there's to meet code, just a couple of lights in the shell. And so there would be a cost coming. I think, Nick, you put some preliminary target together for just from a budgetary purpose, but just bear in mind that there would be the need to put minimum mechanical electrical work in the space to complete. Aaron, did I address your questions or anybody else's questions with my comments? Anything else I need to describe?
I think you covered it, Mike. I appreciate that. Can we hear next from DCI?
This is Nick. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
So I agree with everything that Mike just said. I just went on a little bit further in what I had issued earlier this week with forecasting some of that stuff that Mike mentioned that if we went ahead, we would ultimately have to do, which is the sprinkler system, some minimal mechanical and some minimal electric. That's just a projection right now because we don't have anybody actually designing it or looking at it from a proposal standpoint. So there would be some future cost for that. And then just to be careful, I plugged in a little bit of contingency for some unknowns. So that was the synopsis of what I sent earlier this week.
I understand. And Nick, are you in agreement regarding the fireproofing, that as far as the code goes, you know, we can probably, I mean, my vision of this would be, it's gonna be mostly concrete. And we might store, the county might store stuff down there, I suppose, or it would be minimally used until time of build out, which is unknown in my mind. But considering that, are we okay from a fire code statute or a fire code perspective?
I wouldn't be the person responsible
Okay.
for answering that. I made an assumption.
Let me jump in here, Nick.
Sure.
So the building is what's classified as a type 2 non-combustible building, and this being in the basement space, no fireproofing is needed. So, as long as there is a sprinkler system present, the fireproofing is not needed. So, again, back to the comment, we would want to make sure that we're installing a fire sprinkler system in the space just for general purposes.
Okay, got it. Those are all the questions that I had for them. Doug or Crystal, do you have questions for Shive or DCI?
Yes, Aaron, so what do we, I saw an estimate from Nick for 418,000. Then did Mike just add on another 184?
No. Mike, would you like to take
No.
that?
The 184,000 is the quotes that we've received to date, and that's included in that estimate. That's the way I look at it. Nick, do you see it that way as well?
That's correct.
Doug, it's,
So the 184 is in the 418.
that's
Correct,
right.
yeah.
Doug, what that
Yeah,
is
thank you.
that's the design fee, steel scope quoted by DDVI, concrete scope quoted by Core, and dirt work scope quoted by Vanderpool. I think when you add those four sums up, they're gonna equal 183 and some change.
Not the design fee.
Oh, excuse me, not the design fee, okay. So the three of them, those are the 183 and change. So you're looking at, Shive is stating that they think that this comes in at approximately 203 to do the additional 4,000 square foot excavation, unfinished basement, but also now slabbing the entirety of the basement floor. So both sides would get the concrete slab. And then I think Mike mentioned that there's going to be some additional fireproofing and minor mechanical, but it really comes down to the board's desire of how far do you want to push this. And my take, just so everyone knows, is that I think it's incredibly prudent for us to look at this seriously, and because there's no future point in time where we're going to be able to capture that kind of square footage for when the county needs it, or in the event that the county needs it. If we're looking at 203, and let's say there's another $25,000 or $30,000 of doing it as minimal as possible to get it done, you know, for that sum, you just can't build anything. And so I am supportive of it, in large part because you can't build for that. We'll have a spot ready to go that would be quote unquote shovel ready at some future point in time. And also, I just think that makes sense. But my concern is this, and I think Nick and DCI kind of addressed it. It's how much further do you want to take it, if at all, or not? And as you do more to it, like pre-plumb it for things and put a design to it, you know, the cost is going to jump up substantially. And it would be my preference, from one of three here, to not go down that route, but to keep it as absolutely bare bones as possible. I do think that having a concrete floor is prudent, because I think it would be an absolute nightmare to put that amount of concrete into the building in 20 years, or whenever they expand. It's going to have a floor at some point, and if you don't address that now, I think it's going to be prohibitively more expensive to do it at a future point. But what this does in my mind is it leaves the county in a better position for when and if the court side needs to expand, or we need to move more offices down there, or we can maybe potentially consolidate some other county offices down there at some future point. under the direction of a different board. But really, that'll be their determination, that future board's determination on what needs to be there and how much they want to build it out. All we're really doing is laying out the bones of the structure so that they have a place to go. And I was just, to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised on bid date when the first 4,000 square foot, and I understand that that was a dirt or gravel floor, when those bids came in and we locked in that contract by accepting it, when that sum came in for $150,000, that's really what triggered the thought to look at the rest of it, because it's not nominal or insignificant to me. That is a large amount of money, but in the scope of tens of millions of dollars of a building, being able to take an additional 10% of the square foot for the future at a small percentage, I thought that was incredibly a smart thing to do. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, because some future board in my mind is going to look back on that decision and say, if we don't do it, wow, they really dropped the ball on that. If they could have really gotten this done for $203,000 or $250,000, why wouldn't they have done that? And so I'm going to be supportive of it. But those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear from the other two supervisors on the board on your thoughts or any questions.
Aaron, so refresh my memory, this gives us 8,000 square footage for shell space?
Correct.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, number two is, do I want to be concerned about, you mentioned plumbing, and I realize, is that something we're gonna have to jackhammer the floors later on, or?
Well, from my read of the blueprints, and I'm not an engineer, but from my read of it, we've got a washroom down there, a laundry facility, and so there will be plumbing in the basement. I think it'd be very prudent to map out exactly where those lines go, but yeah, there will be. The flip side to it, Doug, is that you can get into the weeds of this as much as you want, and we could pay Shive and others to map out a future basement, but I don't know what our needs are going to be in 15 or 20 or 25 years. I don't know definitively who's going to be in there and where they're going to want bathrooms and where they're going to want sinks and that sort of thing. And so I think, yes, that is intrusive at some future point in time when they're going to have to break some concrete to locate drains. But I've done that before. Well, I didn't personally do it, but I've seen it done before, and it adds a little cost to it, but it's doable. And I think that's going to save a lot of money. Otherwise, you're designing and mapping out a basement that we don't need right now, and you're paying for it, and it's going to add a lot to the cost where I don't definitively know where things should go, and I'm not real eager to pay for that. I think that we let a future board determine who belongs there, who needs to go there, what courtroom needs to go there, how that layout looks like, or what that layout looks like, and then yeah, there will be some jackhammering. But I juxtapose that line of thinking with this. Originally, if everyone can recall back to the spring and summer of 2018, when one of the concerns and why we're on the square in the first place, one of the concerns was voiced that people wanted the building to go up and not out. And so the compromise was, well, we could add a third story to this structure at some future point in time, and by doing so, we wouldn't take as much green space. And I understand that position, I respect that position, but if you really think about that, that would mean that the county would have been building a building with a roof that was going to come off, that we were going to spend additional money in footings, and I'm going to say this all wrong, Mike, so sorry, and DCI, but the support structures of the building were going to have to be enlarged to be able to carry the load. I think that's right. And that had a big cost. And so in the design of this, that third story capability got nixed because it was expensive. And if you think about how inconvenient and intrusive that would be, because there's mechanical things on the roof in our current design, there would have been in that design, those would have to come down. The roof would get tore off, have to be stronger to support it, and then building up. That is wildly intrusive in my mind too. And so this is going down instead of up. And yes, at some future point, would there have to be some jackhammering in the basement? Absolutely. But I think that's relatively minor considering from whence we came. That's my take.
You answered my question.
And then some. Crystal, do you have any questions?
Correct.
No, my concerns have been answered.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order from DCI or Shive that you want us to consider before we vote on this?
I think you've covered it from my perspective where we at. Thank you.
I have one question for you, Nick. I see a large machine out there, and again, I'll apologize to the residents of the county and everyone on the call. I don't have the terminology correct, but it looks to me like it drills pilings. Is that right?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. And by doing this on Friday, February 10th, if we go forward and approve it, is that does that impacting the schedule with respect to those folks? I know that it's going to impact it to Vanderpool and Core and DDVI, but they've already provided quotes for us that we can lock into, assuming we do so. But is that going to impact the vendor who's doing the pilings, or are we still within the window where this change is not really inconvenient to them?
It's not going to be inconvenient specifically to the contractor you're referring to.
Okay.
There will be impacts to the project and to the prime contractors in general, but not to that particular one.
Okay. And do you have a ballpark estimate of total time frame added? I mean, are we talking about a couple weeks or a month or 2 months or?
I have projected out a month.
Okay. I think that's important to know. I mean, if that's the case, that's important to know. Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Do I have a motion?
This is Doug. I'll take a shot at it. I would move that we approve 4,000 additional basement shell space in the Justice Center at an estimated cost of $418,000.
Second.
I have a procedural question for Dawn. We have a difference of opinion on the numbers. We've got Shive indicating numbers in the 3 quotes of 183 plus design fee, so we're at 205 plus additional either contingencies and or mechanical and some fireproofing, which we've defined but we don't have a hard number on. Is it fine to us to do like an up to number, or I mean, do we need a number? Because my point is there's a difference of opinion. Shive is laying out a scenario where if we do the absolute minor amount necessary to meet code and to have shell space with the slab in the basement, we're maybe at a delta of 250-ish. DCI has maybe a little more build out in the basement with a number of 418, and I guess I'd like to know from the board if we were thinking that we would prefer to be more minor and conservative. I personally would, which would make the number a little lower and closer to Shive's number, and maybe not quite there, but do we need to have a number at all?
I think you need to have an upper number, whether
Okay.
you end up going that high with what you spend, it's always better to be up, cause you don't have to come back.
Okay.
And it was stated as an estimate, and this is an estimate because we don't have full quotes on the rest of it.
That's fine.
We have the 3 quotes, but the others are all estimates, so.
I understand. Okay. Then we've got a valid motion on the table and a second. Tracy?
Show,
Aye.
McIntyre,
Aye.
DeCook.
Aye. And with that, I thank you all for your time. Have a good Easter weekend. Be safe.
We wanna adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn. Doug?
Second.
Show,
Aye.
McIntyre,
Aye.
DeCook.
Aye. Thank
Thank
you. We're
you.
adjourned.